Okay, Vicki, looking at your macro photos here. Looks like you've got some really nice outside floral shots for the most part. And there's a close-up of somebody's face and some birds here. But so let's take a look. Okay, so here you are using the Nikon Coolpix P500. Okay, and so this is a nice shot, more, telephoto zoomed out, so that's great. Um, and also at that focal length with an aperture of f5 like you've got right here, it has that nice separation of these dry looking twigs here, or these um, against the background of the trees in the background back there. Looks good. Your color, your white balance and everything, that all looks good. Okay, and I'm assuming that this is also still the Nikon Coolpix, but that somehow the little details aren't showing up here. Um, it turns out to be a nice shot, and in this case right here, in a situation like this, when you have especially like some dark greens and things back here in the back, I would definitely go in there and do a little bit of the exposure compensation. Do like some minus, like maybe a minus 0.7 or a minus 1. And then that way the reds would really pop, and then the greens would be a little bit more normal look, and maybe a little bit darker. But definitely your exposure could be just a little darker, and you might want to just consider that exposure compensation. And could also do the same thing with this. Reds, especially like red roses, what I've found is that sometimes the accuracy of the color, like in this case right here, it looks like maybe it's a little on the warmish side in terms of color balance. It looks a little, warmer. So you may want to check your white balance and make sure that if this looks like it might have been shot under maybe a tungsten light or something. Hard to say. Um, but you definitely, when you're working with a subject kind of like this with the predominance of a kind of a dark red, you might want to experiment in terms of doing the exposure compensation to the minus, so that the highlights on it, because what happens in this case right here is that the highlights get lost. And if you just take this down to a little bit of the minus exposure compensation, then you start to pick up these nice little highlights that contrast with the rest of the rows. And these are things that just happen with some of these different flowers that are predominantly darker. Okay, this is a nice shot. Getting in there nice and close. Looks like your focal length, you zoomed out with the Coolpix. So definitely these are the kinds of things I wanted you to find out. How close can you get in? And working with your macro. Okay, yeah, same thing with this one. You might want to experiment a little bit, because when you get these highlights like this, there's always this delicate balancing act in terms of the exposure. And so if you did something where it just went to the minus, it might set this off a little bit more. It's always hard to try and figure out sometimes when you have such a bright color, to try and figure out which way to go in terms of the exposure compensation. But the nice thing about the digital photography, of course, is that just shoot a bunch of things and just experiment and see where it goes. But in terms of getting the shot, I'm really glad that how you shot this particular one. Got in there nice and close. Beautiful. Now, in this one right here, you can see there's a little bit more contrast, in terms of around the highlights versus the darker parts of the rose. And so this one works quite nice, whereas the other one, the lighting maybe wasn't quite as contrasty, but also exposure value might have been able to go down on that a little darker on the earlier rose shot. This one looks like you cropped in on this, but that's fine. Interesting composition. Showing that the texture of her hat over here versus the texture of her skin, and those amazingly long eyelashes there. Good. Okay, now the same kind of thing holds true here. It's another one of those balancing acts, because when you're dealing with lots of darker green vegetation, and then you see how the highlights on this get really kind of they turn a little hot. So you might want to experiment with doing some minus exposure compensation to see what happens, in terms of the highlights. But I mean, in terms of you getting in and checking on your macro shot, this works just fine for that. So beautiful orchid shot there. That's really nice. Okay. And I probably would have cropped a little bit, if you were doing some cropping, cropped in a little tighter so that, of course, your eye goes to the brightest part of the picture, and right here, it'll just go right here first when you really want to keep your viewer's interest right down here on the flowers. That's a beautiful shot. And in terms of exposure and everything, this works out really nice. The yellow is, you can see plenty of detail in the plant. And then you also see, these nice dark leaves back there. And for whatever reason, in this case right here, you didn't have to do any exposure adjustment. Okay, and this one cropped in, so maybe zoomed all the way out. Let's see, focal length of 23. I guess that's probably zoomed all the way out on your Coolpix. In terms of getting things in close. Okay, yeah, so good job. Let's take a look. My favorite ones in here would probably be, okay, I like your first one here. I think that's kind of nice and interesting. I also like, I think this one of this particular rose looks great. Perfect, good exposure on that one. And this particular one's a nice shot, except I probably would have cropped the highlights off up there. So good job, and keep up the good work, and thanks very much.